That's a lot of books. What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're gonna go over etude books that I found especially helpful for me as a saxophone player coming up throughout the years. So I had a video a little while back that goes over 5 of my favorite books that I recommended for musicians. But in this video, it's gonna be specifically narrowed down for saxophone players. So without further ado, let's get to it. So first on the list is 25 Caprices by Siegfried Carr Garrett. So in the opening clip, I'm actually playing a piece of the first etude in the book. This is a great book. It's atonal sonatas, atonal etudes throughout this whole book. So they don't follow a typical structure of what your fingers are kind of used to going to and what your ear is used to hearing. This is a book I highly recommend just because it's not your typical etude book. So if you haven't seen this one, it's a great one to pick up. Next on the list, Charlie Parker Omnibook. So here's a little secret of mine. I don't know if I mentioned it in a video before. I was pretty much only a classical player coming from high school into college. I had no jazz background. I could play by ear just because I played in church a lot, but as far as chord changes, I had no clue, and I'm still learning to this very day. So when I got to college, luckily my instructor said you must learn jazz, all those good things that good instructors tell you to do. And this was one of the first books that he recommended me to get, actually told me to get. And so I remember going through this Omnibook, and if you don't know, it's basically just Charlie Parker solos, like a lot of them, you can tell here on the back. And just reading through this entire book and trying to get my fingers and my ears grasped around jazz, and this was very beneficial to that effect. So this really helped me out in the early stages of my jazz development. So the next book I'm going to recommend is probably one that all saxophonists have. If you don't, go get it. It's the Ferling A2S, or Ferling, however you say that. This is actually the second part. I couldn't find the first part in my library, but a lot of times most people don't even know there's a second part. If you ever have a partner to play some duets with, you can get this second part and turn to the back. There's a lot of duets in here. But this etude book follows your typical structure. You have like a lyrical and a technical piece. Goes throughout different keys on the horn. Very good to develop your technique. So there's that one. All right, so next up is another one. Highly recommend it. Once again, coming into college, I knew nothing about jazz. This book really helped me with my articulation. So if you're having issues or you want to further your development in that, I recommend this book. It's 14 Blues and Funk Etudes by Bob Minster. And so this, oh snap, I just opened this up. Side note, I actually got to hear him play. I probably will edit this out, who knows. But 2004, we did a concert and he was a featured artist, and I need to put that in a frame. Anyway, so if we look back in the dates for this one goes back even further, August of 2001. So this book has a bunch of contrafacts, and I think there are a lot of original tunes. Actually, they all might be original tunes written by Bob Minster, a great composer, player. Obviously, if you don't know the history of Bob Minster, go look him up. But I love this book, and I still assign some stuff out of this book to my students as far as if they're having issues with articulations and just normal jazz style in general. Next up, Lenny Me Houses, Jazz Conception for Saxophone. So this is the advanced one. I remember there being different colors. There's like a beginner one that's a different color. It's not yellow, and an intermediate, and etc. Once again, I love this one because it has a lot of your articulations written in there. And for me, jazz articulation was kind of a hard thing to grasp. It's not as simple as slang, you know, slur, tongue, upbeats, etc., what you're used to hearing. So sometimes seeing it, especially if you're a classical player, sometimes seeing it kind of helps you out. But once again, it's all about listening. So next book, I don't know how you say this, but Laments 33 Concert Etudes for Saxophone. This book was recommended to me when I took a lesson out from a great teacher out in California. Once again, it's a book that I haven't ever honestly heard of before. It might be typical you know, as far as saxophone repertoire is concerned. I really don't know, but I love getting books and sight reading out of them. Honestly, I probably sight read more out of these books than I do study them, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it's kind of your same structure. It looks like it starts in different keys, articulations, etc., etc. Another one down in the books. Next on the list, 14 Jazz and Funk Etudes by Bob Minster. So the last one was Blues and Funk. This is Jazz and Funk. If I remember correctly, just looking through, this one is kind of contrafacts of popular tunes, just with the Bob Minster flavor. I really like his writing. So it has this kind of style. It's recognizable, at least to me. Next up, Voicing, an approach to the saxophone's third register by Don Cinta and Denise Dabney. So I never heard of Denise Dabney before, but Don Cinta, of course, in the classical saxophone realm and just saxophone playing realm, he's like a legend. This book provided me with a different approach to playing altissimo and voicing different notes on the saxophone that I never thought of before. For instance, like using ka to sound overtones instead of your tongue actually touching the reed. You're more of thrusting your tongue into a position that it needs to be in to get those sounds of overtones. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, get the book. I really recommend this one. Next up, Trent Knasten's Daily Studies for Saxophone. So I like this one because it's basically patterns, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevens, diminished scales, all kinds of different things. I honestly use it as a jumping off point. So what I mean by that is I'll take one pattern, let's say that it's in C, and then I'll just take it through all the other keys. The goal is not to look at it, honestly, but it's in there just in case you want to double check yourself. Next, Siegfried. Next is Sigurd Rascher's 158 Saxophone Exercises. So this one is basically your kind of exercises that go through different tonalities. For instance, this first one is basically a diminished pattern. And if you look in here, I don't know how much I show. I don't want to get in trouble or anything, but you can go from 1, it tells you to go to 27, and it's kind of a logical way of going through the book. It's not one to the next to the next. However, you can practice it any way that you want. So next up, this isn't necessarily a saxophone book, but you can use this to work on your technique. I'm sure everyone has heard of it. It's the Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns by Nicholas Laments Key. If you haven't, don't let the names freak you out. So this is Infraenter Ultrapolation. All right, all that good stuff. Honestly, I just use it as patterns and go throughout the horn, try to figure out exactly what it is, tick it through the keys, etc. Or sometimes I'll just play them as they are. Some of them extend through the range of the horn, so that's great, of course. But this is another recommended one. Of course, everybody's like John Coltrane. So anything that gets me one step closer to him is a win in my book. Next up, Closet's 25 Daily Exercises for Saxophone. So once again, this is a good one for articulation and just basically getting your fingers moving. I remember I would honestly use this as a warm-up. It's mostly scalar, hopefully that's the correct word, but scalar exercises. But it goes through different intervals as well. And once you start recognizing some of these things, it can get really fun to play, especially mixing up the articulations. Next up, Patterns for Improvisation by Oliver Nelson. Once again, this one just goes through a bunch of, I don't really even want to call it jazz patterns. They're just patterns that you can play on the saxophone that are beneficial for everybody. This next one, I honestly don't even like. So it's not that it's a bad book. It's just none of the etudes really appeal to me. I honestly never play out of it, but I should still say it since it's in my pile. 24 Jazz Etudes for tenor sax. Next up, this was recommended to me by a very good saxophone player. Used to be in the Marine Corps, now he's out playing in San Diego, but it's called Expansions by Gary Campbell. I'm sure a lot of recommendations are out for this book as I look at the back of it. I mean, it's signed off by and endorsed by Michael, Randy Brecker, John Abercrombie, Bob Minster, David Liebman. So those names in itself should make it worth getting. So next up on my list, this one kind of goes down the Laments Key road of kind of weird names for things. I don't want to call it weird. It's just names for things, I guess. But it's the Repository of Scales and Melodic Patterns by Yusef Lateef. So you want to hear some jazz oboe, check him out. I like his playing a lot. But it's the same thing in here. Like, let me just go to a random one. Like, this is the Persian scale patterns. And then we also have arpeggiated quartal chord patterns. And actually, that's not weird at all. I guess I kind of understand what they're saying, but yeah, disjunct Hebrew polytetrachords. There you go. I'm always about learning, so I picked this one up. There it is. Next up on the list is another book just being honest, I haven't really worked out of a lot. It's like almost brand new as I sit here and look at it. But Ted Nash's Studies in High Harmonics. I went through an altissimo phase where I was just trying to get as much knowledge as possible, especially if the book contains like etudes. Like this one kind of has patterns, and I don't think it has actually, yeah, it does have etudes. Like there's one over I'll Remember April that goes high into the altissimo register. So I was looking for stuff like that to kind of sight read and get my fingers used to playing up there. So this is a great book for that. Ted Nash's Studies in High Harmonics. Next up, Intervallic Improvisation, The Modern Sound by Walt Weiss. So when I really listen to my playing, it's becoming kind of scalar. I think I said that word before. It doesn't really have a lot of leaps and jumps in it. And that sound was appealing to me for a while, and it kind of still is. And so if that interests you, you know, to get out of playing kind of in a linear pattern and more of a what is that? I guess a horizontal pattern, this book would be for you. Next up on my list is a book, once again, just being honest, I haven't gone through it at all. I bought this later on in my life just to have it in my library in case I had a student that I needed to loan it out to. But this is The Art of Saxophone Playing. Of course, it's a classic. I should do better by Larry Till. But it goes into like playing position, the mouthpiece, what the saxophones are. So if you're a super uber beginner, or if you just want to add this to your library like I did for future students, or it's just good, coffee table reading, purchase this one as well. The Art of Saxophone Playing by Larry Till. All right, so next on the list, I went through a phase. I want to say this is probably like 2001 to 2004, 5. It lasted a very long time. I was just obsessed with Kenny Garrett. Could not get enough. So of course I had to purchase the Kenny Garrett collection. So this book has some of his transcriptions in there. Actually, when I was comparing it to some of the things he was playing, like I transcribed some of it myself, it didn't quite match up. So it's probably my ear being a little bit crazy, but that's few and far in between. It's not enough to say don't buy the book. By all means, I'm not saying that. But once again, Kenny Garrett collection, transcribe it yourself, verify it with this book, or do whatever you want, because we all learn differently. And last on my list, I actually got these books very late in life while I was working on my master's program. My teacher, Dennis de Blasio, recommended these two to me, and I never played out of them before, but it's Technique of the Saxophone. So there's two different volumes. Volume 1 here is Scale Studies, and Volume 2 here is Chord Studies. So once again, this book is by Joseph Viola. Very good book because it's something not typical. When I played the etudes, there were etudes that my fingers are not used to going to. So I love really playing a lot of etudes and exercises of that nature. And of course, the scale studies is always a good thing to expand your range and knowledge of scales and just fluency of technique in your fingers. Whoa, so there we have it. That was 21 or 22, I can't even remember, books that I've used for the saxophone throughout the years. Hopefully, they'll come into benefit for you and you recognize them, or maybe I've shown you a couple that you haven't seen. Go check them out. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Out.